basically what happens is that you have to apply for your probate to the probate registry. However, the background to that depends on whether or not tax is payable. By tax, I'm referring to inheritance tax, which, as you'll see in these slides, I summarize as IHT. That's the standard abbreviation for inheritance tax. It depends on whether tax is payable or not payable, and it depends on whether there's a will or not a will. If there's tax payable, then you have to, the procedures are all similar. So they're similar, but they're different. So if you've got tax to be paid, you have to produce a form IHT 400, which is a long form. It's 40, 50 pages long. And that has to be completed. You have to work out how much tax is payable, and then you have to send the tax to HM Revenue and Customs. At the same time, you have to send a PA1 form to the probate registry, but the probate registry will not issue the grant of probate unless and until they receive confirmation from HMRC that the tax has been paid. So you have to do the two together. I'll go into all these details in another module, another webinar. If tax is not payable, then it's simpler. You have to produce the IHT 205, which is much shorter. It's about 5 or 6 pages long. You send that to the probate registry with your PA1 form. They then produce an oath for executors, which they send back to you to get sworn. You send the oath executors back to them once it's been sworn, and then you should get your grant of probate within 2 weeks. Just a note of caution on this. As I've stressed before, you have to be careful. If you make a mistake and suddenly find that you are owing the taxman money, but you made a mistake, whether deliberate or not, then you have to produce the IHT 400, and you'll find the taxman tends to lack a sense of humor about making mistakes. So be careful. Make sure you get it right. A guesstimate will not cut the mustard. If you aren't sure as to the value of your property, get it valued. And finally, where there is no will, I'll deal with terminology in a few minutes, but if there's no will, that's called intestacy. You still have to complete your form 400 or 205. I often get a comment from people saying, well, if there's no will, I don't need to get probate, which is completely misunderstanding what's going on. You always need probate. They're except in a very limited number of circumstances. Unless you always need probate. So they talk about the two things which are unavoidable in life are death and taxes. I would definitely add probate to that list. So whether you've got a will or not a will, you will need probate. The exception is if you've got an estate worth or an account worth less than £5,000, then sometimes the organisation, the bank or building society, will release that money without a grant of probate. But it's personal to them, as it were. So some banks won't observe it, and they will still insist on a grant of probate. Other organisations will let you have the grant of probate, so they let you have the money for considerably more than £5,000. So it depends on the organisation. But the other thing is, if your estate includes shares or property, you will need probate. So that's the situation. It's also a question of terminology. In the case of a will, you get what's called a grant of probate. If you've got intestacy, you've got no will, you get a grant of letters of administration. And the other complicating factor in that one is that you have to prove that you are entitled to the grant of letters of administration, and there's a process to that. This is not the place for it, but it's a fixed list of the people who can apply for that particular grant.